Today's submitted script is a media critique arguing that public anger toward a prominent journalist actually stems from his controversial reporting on the Force 100 military incident rather than his demographic identity as an educated left-leaning Ashkenazi.
Right, yeah.
So a key theme running through this material seems to be the profound clash between the journalist's self-perception and the narrator's assertion that the backlash is purely based on the Force 100 broadcast.
Exactly.
We've only got a bit of time, so let's just jump right into the feedback on how to pull this off.
Let's do it. So my topic sentence for this first section is this: the script effectively captures the raw public emotions surrounding the Force 100 incident, but its central argument could be far more persuasive by dismantling the journalist's specific claims of demographic bias with empirical contrasts rather than, character judgments.
Right out of the gate, I want to push back on that a little bit, just putting myself in the writer's shoes.
Okay, sure.
Because I read the opening lines where the script tells the journalist a little self-awareness wouldn't hurt you and accuses him of sitting in a studio spreading hate.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy-handed.
But from a writer's perspective, I get the instinct here. When you're writing a polemic or a media critique, you want to swing hard. Doesn't that raw anger resonate with an audience that's already upset?
Well, it resonates with the choir. Absolutely. I mean, if your only goal is to get high fives from people who already agree with you, it works great.
Right.
But we have to ask what the actual purpose of this critique is. Here's the weakness. If the goal is to dismantle a defense, relying on ad hominem frustration completely undermines the objective power of the analysis.
Because it just sounds like you're mad.
Exactly. The moment you tell an opponent they're just spreading hate, you're essentially asking the audience to trust your emotional interpretation of their intent.
Which gives the other side an easy way out.
An incredibly easy out. They can just wave away the entire script as partisan name-calling rather than substantive media criticism.
Yeah, I can see what you're going for here. Let's see how we can strengthen this conceptually. Because I think of this almost like a scientific experiment.
Oh, I like that. Go on.
If you want to prove to a skeptical audience that a specific chemical, in this case, the controversial Force 100 reporting, caused an explosion of public anger, you have to prove that the beaker holding the chemical didn't cause the reaction on its own.
That's a perfect framing. And in this case, the beaker is the journalist's demographic identity.
Yes.
He's claiming the public is mad at the beaker.
Exactly. So if you just stand there yelling at the beaker, calling it oblivious or hateful, you lose the scientific high ground.
You do.
But if you can prove the beaker was sitting there safely yesterday, or that other identical beakers are sitting on the counter right now not exploding, you mathematically prove it was the new chemical that caused the reaction.
Which leads us directly to the suggestion for how to actually rewrite this opening. We need to strip out the character judgments and ground the transition into the Force 100 incident in comparative analysis.
Meaning isolating the reporting itself.
Right, isolating the reporting as the undeniable, standalone variable for the public's anger.
What does that look like in practice for the listener, though? How do they rewrite that paragraph? Give us some concrete examples.
Okay, so instead of stating he lacks self-awareness, bring the receipts. Briefly contrast him with other prominent media figures who share his exact demographic background.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, point to another Ashkenazi, educated, left-leaning broadcaster who is not currently facing this intense level of public animosity.
That makes a lot of sense.
Or, alternatively, point out that he himself did not face this specific, extreme peak of public anger a year ago. His demographics haven't changed in the last 12 months.
Right, he's the same guy.
Exactly. Because his unchanging identity cannot logically be the catalyst, it leaves only his recent reporting as the culprit.
It's so much more devastating when you do it that way. You aren't asking the audience for trust. You're presenting them with a logical puzzle that solves itself.
And the audience doesn't have to agree with your politics to agree with a demographic timeline. You elevate the narrator from a frustrated observer to a forensic analyst.
Which earns you trust for the rest of the critique.
Exactly. When a writer sets a rock-solid, objective foundation in the opening, they earn the trust required for the heavy lifting later in the script. Because if this opening premise fails, the audience will be inherently suspicious of how the script handles the actual messy evidence of the military incident.
Well, speaking of that messy evidence, let's test how the script holds up once we get into the weeds of the controversy.
Let's do it.
Let's look closely at the section discussing the sodomy under circumstances of rape allegations. And specifically, the narrator's claim that nothing is left of those initial dramatic headlines.
Right. So the topic sentence here is that the segment forcefully condemns the reporting on the military incident as libelous propaganda, yet it leaves a critical argumentative vulnerability by not directly addressing the actual video footage that the journalist broadcast.
Wait a second, let me play devil's advocate here.
Okay.
As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that the reporting was essentially global propaganda that damaged the country's reputation.
Yes, that's the thrust of it.
If the writer's entire thesis is that the story was wildly overblown or false, why on earth would they remind the audience that the leaked video footage exists? Aren't they just giving oxygen to the journalist's best piece of evidence?
See, that is the exact psychological trap writers fall into.
Really?
Yes. They think if I ignore the opponent's best evidence, maybe the audience will just forget about it.
But they don't?
No, the opposite happened. The weakness here is that the controversial footage was aired and heavily debated across the nation. Everyone knows it exists.
Right, it was everywhere.
So when the unconvinced viewer watches a critique that claims nothing is left of the story, but they vividly remember seeing security footage on the nightly news, massive cognitive dissonance occurs.
Oh, I see.
By ignoring that reality, the narrator looks evasive. You aren't hiding the evidence, you're just proving you're too scared to fight it.
So how do you fight it without destroying your own thesis?
My suggestion is to use a rhetorical concept called steelmanning.
Steelmanning? Okay.
Yeah, you take your opponent's strongest possible piece of evidence, you bring it up yourself before they even get the chance, and you reframe it to actively support your own narrative regarding journalistic ethics. You have to directly confront the footage.
Give me an example of how the writer can thread that needle. How do you bring up the tape while still arguing the journalist is at fault?
Okay, concretely, you address the footage head-on by pointing out its flaws. You write something like, yes, we all saw the leaked footage, but let's look at what was actually aired. Inconclusive, selectively edited, shadows rushed to the screen without proper context.
Nice.
And then you pivot to the ethical stand. You add a line questioning the sheer recklessness of broadcasting highly sensitive, unverified, and ambiguous material during wartime just to score a scoop.
Ah, I see what that does. That is a brilliant shift in the battlefield.
It really is.
Because if you try to argue that nothing happened, you're forcing yourself to prove a negative, which is nearly impossible, and opens you up to endless debate about what's actually on the tape.
Exactly.
But if you argue that the journalistic standard was recklessly breached, you're now arguing about professional ethics. That's a fight you can easily win based on the public backlash alone.
Precisely. You take the journalist's sword and you use it to defend your own thesis. You're saying the tape isn't proof of a war crime, the tape is proof of your malpractice.
Which ties directly into the overarching theme of the piece.
Right, which is accountability. If you want to hold a media figure accountable, you have to dissect their actual professional choices, what they aired, when they aired it, and how they framed it. If you gloss over the broadcast, you undercut the very mechanism of accountability you're trying to champion.
And it prevents that terrible moment where the informed listener sits there thinking, yeah, but what about the video?
Exactly. You've answered the question before they can even articulate it.
So we fortified the opening premise by replacing character attacks with objective demographic contrasts.
Yep.
We fortified the evidentiary middle by steelmanning the broadcasted footage and turning into an ethical breach.
Right.
Now, if we successfully pivot the focus back to the journalist's ethics, as we just discussed, it actually sets up a fascinating trap for the writer at the very end of their script.
It really does. So my topic sentence for this final section is that the conclusion attempts to deliver a powerful, sweeping statement about national political legacies. But the sudden pivot to the Prime Minister dilutes the script's previously tight focus on journalistic accountability regarding the Force 100 case.
Okay, so what I really like about this part is the ambition.
Oh, totally.
Tying a specific hyper-focused news cycle to a much larger cultural conversation about who is responsible for the legacy of hatred in the country, the media or Benjamin Netanyahu, is exactly what great commentary does. It attempts to answer the macro, so what question.
It's the big payoff.
Yeah, it's totally natural for a writer to want their piece to feel massive. And name-dropping the Prime Minister is a quick way to artificially inflate the stakes.
It is natural, but here's the weakness in this execution. It causes severe thematic whiplash.
Whiplash, yeah.
Think about the geometry of the script we've just discussed. The writer spends 90% of the runtime dissecting a highly specific, intense military reporting scandal.
Right.
But then, in the final moments, they suddenly zoom out to a generalized debate about Netanyahu's legacy versus the media's legacy. This disconnect makes the ending feel like it belongs to a completely different video. You leave all that specific evidence about the broadcast dangling without resolution.
It feels like an unearned mic drop. You can't just jump from, this journalist aired bad footage, to, and this is why the media's legacy is hatred, not the prime minister's.
Exactly.
You're asking the audience to build the bridge between the micro and the macro in real time in their own heads. So what's the suggestion? How does the writer keep that massive, ambitious ending without it feeling disjointed?
You have to explicitly use the Force 100 reporting as the foundational proof for your final claim. That's the key.
Connecting the two.
Right. The specific incident needs to be the structural bridge to the broader thematic conclusion. The audience needs to see that the Force 100 incident isn't just an isolated mistake, it is the very symptom of the disease you're diagnosing at the end of the script.
Give me a concrete example of that. What's a concrete way to tie those threads together in the actual copy?
You need a concluding statement that physically binds the two ideas in the same sentence.
Okay.
Something like, when reporters recklessly broadcast unverified claims against soldiers and refuse to retract them. That is the exact mechanism that breeds division. So before the studio starts blaming Netanyahu for the national hatred, they need only look at how they handled the Force 100 story.
Wow, that changes everything.
It brings it all home.
It validates the entire journey you just took the listener on. Because if Force 100 is just one random topic and the prime minister is another random topic, the audience experiences a logical leap.
Exactly.
But by using that phrasing, the Force 100 incident becomes Exhibit A in the trial against the media's legacy. You start narrow, you examine the evidence, and then you fan out at the very end to show the widespread blast radius of that specific evidence.
And notice how perfectly this loops back to our very first point about the beaker and the demographic identity.
Oh, yeah.
The journalist claims the division in the country is caused by who he is, his identity.
Right.
The script argues the division is caused by what he does, his reporting. Therefore, the conclusion has to definitively state that it is the actions of the media, specifically actions exactly like the Force 10 broadcast, that generate the legacy of hatred. Because if you don't connect those dots explicitly at the end, the journalist's original excuse that this is all just demographic bias might sneak its way right back into the listener's mind.
Exactly.
It's all about sealing the exits. A masterful critique anticipates counter-arguments and systematically closes every escape route.
That is the essence of building a truly airtight argument.
You close the identity escape route in the opening by bringing in objective comparisons.
Yep.
You close the evidentiary escape route in the middle by confronting his video footage directly.
Right.
And you close the philosophical escape route at the end by explicitly tying his specific actions to the broader cultural damage. You leave absolutely no room for a generic political defense.
Let's quickly recap the journey we just mapped out for this rewrite. First, we explored why relying on character attacks feels good but ultimately weakens the argument. And we replaced it with empirical demographic contrast to lock in a bulletproof opening premise.
Right.
Second, we tackled the fear of the opponent's best evidence, showing how steel-manning the broadcasted footage and reframing it as an ethical breach is far more effective than pretending it doesn't exist.
Crucial step.
And finally, we looked at the ambition of the ending and established how to explicitly use the Force 100 evidence as the load-bearing pillar for that final, sweeping thesis about national division.
So the big actionable summary for the writer here is that strengthening your work isn't about softening your stance or backing down from the fight.
Not at all.
It's about channeling that raw passion into clinical execution. It's about ensuring that every single point mathematically builds to the next without leaving any rhetorical gaps for your opponent to slip through. When you build the walls tight enough, the roof supports itself perfectly.
We would absolutely love to see how these concepts shape the next draft. We warmly invite the listener to revise the script, put these structural pillars in place, and submit it back to us for another round of feedback.
Definitely.
Because at the end of the day, a great critique isn't a chaotic blast of anger, it's a calculated, controlled demolition, targeting the exact structural weaknesses of the opposing argument until it comes down perfectly within its own footprint.